Before she died, the engineer who saved Apollo 11 finally revealed how close NASA came to losing everything, and the disturbing discovery the agency was forced to hide. 3 minutes before the spacecraft touched the moon, something went terribly wrong deep inside the capsule. What happened in those final minutes was far more dangerous than NASA ever admitted, and the truth only came out decades later when the woman responsible for saving the mission chose to speak.
The night NASA lost control. The alarms began without warning as the lunar module Eagle moved steadily toward the moon. Inside the small cabin, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were focused on landing. The ground was coming closer. Then the onboard computer flashed numbers that no one expected to see. The screen showed 12001, then 12002. The sounds cut through the cabin and through mission control like a blade. These alarms were not routine. They were marked in training as events that should never happen during a landing. They signaled that something deep inside the computer system was going wrong. The astronauts did not know what had failed. They only knew that the machine guiding them to the surface was under stress. In Houston, the flight control room went silent. Engineers stared at their screens. Controllers felt their hands go cold. The landing was only minutes away. There was almost no time left to think. Houston, we have a problem. We have a main bus undervolt. They had to choose whether to abort the mission or press on. An abort would mean admitting failure in front of the entire world. It would mean decades of work wasted. It would also mean the risk that the Soviet Union could reach the moon first. At the same moment, far from Houston and far from the moon, Margaret Hamilton was watching the same data. She was one of the lead software engineers who helped build the Apollo guidance computer. She knew its limits better than almost anyone. When she saw the alarms, she felt shock and fear rise at once. She later said that her first thought was simple and terrifying. This had never happened before, not in testing, not in simulations, not in any mission. She wondered why it was happening now during Apollo 11 at the exact moment when everything was on the line. The computer was overloaded. It was being asked to do more work than it could handle at one time. Data from the radar was flooding in. Navigation calculations were stacking up. The system was falling behind. Under normal conditions, this kind of overload would cause a full crash. A crash would erase navigation data. Without navigation, the astronauts would lose their guidance. That loss could leave them unable to land or return safely. As engineers looked closer, they realized something even more frightening. The hardware had not failed. The computer was doing exactly what it had been told to do. A radar switch had been left in the wrong position. That small human error was sending extra data into the system and stealing precious computing power at the worst possible moment. The landing was seconds away from being canceled. Then something unexpected happened. The computer did not shut down. It did not freeze. Instead, it began to protect itself. It started rejecting tasks it could not afford to run. It dropped work that was not essential. It kept only the core functions needed to land the spacecraft safely. It focused on survival. The controllers did not continue the mission because they felt brave. They continued because they trusted the software. That trust came from years of arguments, warnings, and hard lessons. It came from a belief that the machine could handle failure without collapsing. That belief had been formed long before Apollo 11, inside a small lab at MIT, after a moment when a child pressed keys she should never have touched and revealed a truth that NASA had tried to ignore.
The child who broke the moon mission. Years before Apollo 11, Margaret Hamilton brought her young daughter, Lauren, to work at the MIT lab. It was a quiet day. The room was filled with large computers that hummed steadily. Engineers were running a simulation of a lunar mission, testing how the guidance system would behave during flight. How you read? Okay, read your babe. You're looking good on the ground, Odyssey. To them, it was routine work, but to a child, it looked like a control room for space travel. Lauren sat at the console and pretended she was an astronaut. She touched the keyboard. She pressed a few keys without knowing what they meant or what they controlled. The system crashed. In an instant, the simulation collapsed. Navigation data disappeared. The virtual spacecraft lost its position and direction. On the screens, the mission was gone. The astronauts were lost in space. I moved from the command module. Some people in the room thought it was a harmless accident. It could be reset. No real spacecraft was at risk. But Hamilton felt something else. She felt fear. She later said that the thought hit her immediately and refused to leave. This could happen in a real mission. The problem was simple and deeply frightening. A program that was meant to run only before launch had been activated during a simulated flight. The computer did not fail. It followed instructions perfectly. It erased navigation data because it was told to do so. The machine had no way to know that the timing was wrong. If this happened in space, the result would be far worse than a failed landing. Without navigation data, the crew would lose their ability to know where they were or where they were going. They could drift endlessly, unable to return home. Hamilton took this discovery seriously. She went to her managers and explained what had happened. She asked to add protections to the software. She wanted a code that could prevent this mistake, even if a human pressed the wrong button. The answer she received was clear and cold. No, they said. The software was already complex. They said astronauts were highly trained and would never make that kind of error. Then Apollo 8 went to the moon and everything changed. While orbiting the lunar surface, astronaut Jim Lovell spoke words that froze mission control. He said he thought he had done something wrong. He had pressed the wrong button. The same program was activated. The same danger appeared. Confusion spread through the control room. They rebuilt navigation data step by step. They sent it back to the spacecraft. Apollo 8 survived, but only barely. After that, the arguments ended. Hamilton was finally allowed to strengthen the system. She added layers of protection that could catch mistakes before they caused disaster. She built logic that could interrupt astronauts, shut down unsafe actions, and raise alarms when the system was in danger. What NASA learned was unsettling. Space was dangerous, but it was predictable. Humans were not. The greatest threat to the mission was not the moon. It was human error meeting software that could not protect itself. And when Apollo 11 began its descent, that lesson would decide whether the crew lived or died.
The code that shows who lived or died. In the 1960s, computers were rigid machines. They followed instructions exactly as written and in the exact order given, and they could only do one task at a time. They did not pause to ask questions. They did not adjust to surprise. When something unexpected happened, they simply stopped working. Failure was immediate and complete. Margaret Hamilton refused to accept that kind of weakness.
But of course, it ended up being more jobs were created with the computers than there were with the Marshot machines.
She understood that spaceflight was full of the unexpected. Astronauts could press the wrong button. Sensors could send bad data. Systems could overload at the worst possible moment. A computer that simply gave up under pressure was not acceptable. Lives depended on it. Hamilton set out to build software that could think about importance. Her system could decide which tasks mattered most and which could be ignored when time and power were running out. Today, this approach is common and well understood, but at the time it was almost unheard of. It did not even have a clear name. What mattered was what it could do. Her software could interrupt itself. Hamilton's group wrote the lunar lander guidance software, and they had to plan for every contingency. It could stop working on less important jobs and focus on the core task. It could survive overload without collapsing. Instead of crashing, it could recover and keep going. This was not just a clever technical idea. It was a system designed to decide who lived and who died. It assumed that humans would make mistakes and that machines had to be ready for that reality. During Apollo 11, when the alarms sounded inside Eagle, the computer did not freeze. It did not shut down. It followed the rules Hamilton had written. It discarded tasks that were not essential. It protected the guidance system. It kept the landing possible. There is a famous image of Hamilton standing beside stacks of printed code that rise nearly as high as her body. Every line mattered to her. Every safeguard was intentional. She fought for each one. In the beginning, she was not fully trusted. She was young. She was a woman. She was new to a field dominated by older men. Her warnings were often dismissed. But by the time Apollo 11 flew, she was the lead software designer. And when the alarms rang and the landing continued, NASA were finally forced to understand that survival now depended on software more than hardware or pilots. That realization frightened them more than anything they had expected to face on the lunar surface. The truth NASA never put in the press releases. After Apollo 11, NASA chose its words with care. In public briefings and official reports, the landing was described as smooth, controlled, and carefully planned.
Apollo 11, Houston, got a minute and a half to low, you're looking great. Been a mighty fine day. The alarms were acknowledged, but only lightly. They were described as minor issues, manageable problems, small technical quirks that had been handled without danger. But that was not how it felt inside the agency. Inside NASA, engineers knew exactly what had happened. They knew the lunar module had landed while the guidance computer was under extreme stress. They knew the alarms were not harmless signals. They were warnings that the system was overloaded and struggling to keep up. They knew the computer had been only seconds away from forcing an abort. They knew it had not been operating comfortably. The success of the landing carried a disturbing lesson. Humans could reach another world, but only if machines were allowed to take control when humans made mistakes or when conditions became chaotic. The computer had